everybody, and welcome to the Wine with Jimmy channel. Delighted that you have stopped by, and welcome to the wine educational channel designed for those of you studying the world of wine. And really, we're hoping that you get much more from it to enjoy your studies, to, of course, really pass those exams. So here we have a series on the wines of the world. That's the D3 section for the WSET Level 4. That's the diploma. So we're here looking at the northeast of Italy. So this is the section. Here you go. Northeast Italy is split into 7 series. So Trentino, Alto Adige, Friuli, Venezia Giulia, then Veneto, which is a significant section. It comprises really of all of the following series. So we are going to look at this one here. So we are looking at Trentino. We'll go through introduction and history in this video. Then the growing environment and introduction to grapes. Now, both of those parts are available as free content around the likes of YouTube, but parts 3, 4 and 5 are only available on my e-learning portal. That's over at www.winewithjimmy.com. If any of you have any comments or questions or concerns, you can get in touch. You can do so by commenting on this video below. You can also get in touch via the likes of social media, and you'll see all of the relevant handles at the bottom of every slide. Make sure you also click like and subscribe if you are on the likes of YouTube. So let's rock and roll looking at Trentino. Now, we're actually going to separate Trentino and Alto Adige into 2 separate areas, because in terms of wine, it really does have some significant differences. There are, of course, our overlap, but we're looking at a bit of a difference. But before we do, let's just talk about the area as a whole. So the entire region of Trentino Alto Adige is located in the foothills of the Alps. And I've given you here the map of Italy. We've identified Trentino Alto Adige in the red here, bordering the likes of Austria and Switzerland. So, of course, firmly in the Alps. And then in terms of the other autonomous regions of Italy, it borders Lombardia and Veneto. Okay, so firmly in the north, the most northerly part that we find of Italy. On the right-hand side here is the map of the highlighted area of both Trentino and Alto Adige. Trentino is the southern section, with Trento as its beating heart, and then Bolzano is the main city that we find for the Alto Adige. Okay, so we have good agriculture here. Now, actually, only about 10 to 15% of the land can be cultivated in this area. And you will find a lot of fruit growing on the valley floor. So close to things like the Adige River or the Isarco. Nearer the river, you will find lots of apple production. It's a remarkable, important industry in this area. And then when you go from the valley floor, close to the rivers, just going into the hills, that's when it then changes into viticulture. So we generally find it on sort of the lower base to the middle base of the slopes in these areas. Okay, a little bit of the split of this area. Now, we have an autonomous region called Trentino Alto Adige. So for administrative purposes, it's combined. But as I mentioned, it's best to actually separate these two out. So we'll do series 1 on Trentino and series 2 on Alto Adige. The province in the southern section, which has Trento as its capital. So down here we have the northern part of Lake Garda. Down here is the Veneto area. This Trento area is, of course, therefore very much connected to Italy and is predominantly Italian speaking. So it very much has aligned itself much more to Italy, as one would expect in terms of its geographical location. Then in the north, you've got Bolzano. This is our Alto Adige area, also known as the South Tyrol or Südtirol. This is much more led by German. So we have a majority German speaking. So really across this whole region, we're talking about two languages being spoken here, both Italian and German. But in the north, it's much more focused on German. Of course, quite important for tourism as well, coming from Austria and Germany. People head their way down to Lake Garda, and this area is very much famed for lots of visitors from the north. So that's a bit of the sort of layout of the land, a little bit of history here. So wine production in Trentino now. We're now not talking about Alto Adige. We're just going to focus on the southern part, which of course is Trentino. Wine production has been documented in these regions and around sort of Trentino as early as the 7th century BC, and vineyards flourished during the time obviously spent under Roman control. The Romans came through here in the 15th century BC, 15 BC, and of course therefore brought a fair bit of stability here, many hundreds of years of stability, which meant that vineyards would flourish at that time. But of course, then eventually the Western Roman Empire collapses at the end of the 5th century, and this brought really a series of instability, years and centuries of instability, which of course the wine industry would suffer as a result. In this area, wine started to revive during the Middle Ages. And that's because of the rise of the church, which created stability in winemaking for the first purpose, for sacramental purposes. The blood of Christ wine was used, but then, of course, for trading and for the local populace as well. Both of the areas of Trentino and Alto Adige at this time looked to Northern Europe for a customer base for their wines as well. So sort of moving away from domestic local wines. Since the Middle Ages, the history of Trentino has been very much closely linked and intertwined with the House of Tyrol. So this is Tyrol or Tirol, depending on where you come from. Now, the surroundings of the town of Trento, which is today the city of Trento down in the south, in those days were a part of what we call the Prince Bishopric of the Trentino, which enjoyed a special autonomy in the Roman Imperium of the German nation. So this bishopric was protected by the Counts of Tyrol, whose impact on the area increased more and more and generated tensions with the bishops. Of course, this is quite classic across Italy, the rise of more wealthy factions, and of course not necessarily aligning with the desires and the wants of the papal states. In the 15th century, troops of the Maritime Republic of Venice entered parts of Trentino. Eventually they were stopped in the Battle of Cagliano, and in the 19th century, after the end of the Empire of Napoleon, so this is early parts of the 19th century, the region of Trentino became part of the County of Tyrol in Austria and mainly lost its autonomy. It eventually would then go across to the Kingdom of Italy at the end of the First World War. So just a little bit of background there for you, a little bit of an introduction now into Trentino's grape varieties, and then we'll go a little bit in terms of its kind of formation of its business. Just a couple of slides to go through here. Now, Trentino, remember, we are just looking at an introduction here. We will drill down into much more specifics in following presentations. Trentino typically produces white wines. So we have a big focus of whites. And in fact, you will see that the major two grape varieties in Trentino, accounting for well over half of the production, are Chardonnay and Pinot Grigio. But Müller-Thurgau is the third grape variety as well, with just under 10% of production. Generally speaking, these wines are normally unoaked and fresh, but you will find wines, of course, certainly Chardonnay, that will have potentially oak or malolactic or yeast autolysis and those kind of processes. We also find red varieties here. So you'll notice that we have Teroldego, we have Merlot, we have also the likes of things like Marzamino as well. I'm going to talk about Teroldego, which is often called the Prince of Trentino, and Marzamino, which has been very famous in cultural literature before. Also a little bit of things like Schiava here, but mainly we'll focus on Teroldego, Marzamino, and Merlot. There's also Gewürztraminer grown here as well as just mentioned there. Typically, the wines are good to very good in quality and inexpensive to mid-priced, typically. A lot of the Chardonnay, it must be mentioned, is actually utilized for the mountain bubbles, the sparkling wines, the Trento DOC. Now, we're not going to cover it in this section because, of course, it's for sparkling wine, but it is a significant production here in Trentino. Our last slide is just talking about a bit of the structure of the landscape here in terms of wine business. Now, just over 80% of the wines are produced by cooperatives, so very much dominated by co-ops. This is quite a typical model as we go into Trentino and Alto Adige. You've got to remember that this is the Prealps. You've got real sort of mountainous conditions happening here, and vineyards are generally very scattered, generally non-contiguous. So you often have very small holdings which are owned by farmers, and they don't necessarily have the ability to produce their own wine. So they typically will sell their grapes to factories, local businesses, such as cooperatives, for example. So just over 80%. I've given you an example there of quite a famous one, which is Mezzacarona, named after the place of the same name. So yes, producing fairly large quantities of approachable wines and some higher quality wines as well. Production levels over the last 10 years have remained broadly stable from Trentino. It is an area which is diversifying as many other regions are. They are certainly starting to focus on some of their more autochthonous indigenous grape varieties. But also at the same time, they are modernizing. You will find, of course, quite a focus on Pinot Grigio because it is a variety which, of course, many people across the world enjoy. That brings me to the end of our first part here on Trentino. Just a word on how I structure these presentations. I always give you exactly what you will need from the diploma syllabus, plus lots of extras, more bells and whistles, what WSET would classify as flair, extra bits of information, so you get more from it. This is very good for your diploma studies, of course, it's exactly aligned for it, but also really good for those of you studying for the likes of Master of Wine. Please join me for part 2 on the growing environment and also a quick introduction to grapes. We've kind of had a look at here as well. If you have any comments, questions or concerns, then pop a comment below this video and get in touch. Please use the social media also if you are that way inclined. And if you find yourself in London, in the United Kingdom, that's where I am situated. Come and see me at one of my establishments. So maybe for a class, maybe for a glass, maybe probably more likely for a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Ciao for now. Thank you.